Good afternoon. My name is Joe Lewis, and I'm with Deloitte Consulting, and I will keep this brief because I think you're probably more interested in Kelly's findings and talk than my introduction. So with that, Kelly began her career at GE, was quickly lured into consulting, and is now a principal with Deloitte Strategy and Operations Practice. She focuses primarily on companies within the technology, life sciences, and consumer businesses areas, and works within the manufacturing operations sector. In addition to her client-facing responsibilities, Kelly is also the MBA recruiting lead for the strategy and operations practice, and she is also deeply involved with Deloitte's downturn initiative, which is focused on helping companies set the right course for their businesses through these volatile times. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kelly.
Well, thank you, Joe, and thanks to all of you for coming in early for lunch. I am absolutely delighted to be here this afternoon. We have some very interesting survey results that are literally hot off the presses. We had a survey that went out to quite a large number of large global companies, cross industries, most of them headquartered in the United States, and so we've got some fascinating results to share and really welcome your feedback and questions because as we start to shape some of the thoughtware around that, it'll be interesting to hear what stands out to you for some of the survey results. Okay, so before we went out with this survey, what we needed to do is really set a framework for which we were going to ask the questions. Most of these were more interview-based than just kind of sending out a blind survey. And if companies take actions, it's to achieve, hopefully, an objective. And so the four major objectives that we put out in our framework fall under these pillars. One of them being and most importantly in this last downturn is around preserving liquidity and capital, right? So given what happened last fall, that became more important than it has in recent history. And so the second one would be around focusing on cost. So, given $1 trillion of consumer spending has gone out of the marketplace, well, you got to do something in order to survive, in addition to making sure you can pay the bills with the cash, but it's also around focusing on cost so you can stay around for a while. The third is around positioning for growth, because if you're losing customers and the marketplace looks different, how are you positioning yourself to make sure that you stay and thrive and are a vibrant company as you move forward? And then finally around managing talent. So most of the downturn is all focused on what are the realignments and reductions in forces that have been happening, but I think that falls more under the first two around focusing on cost. The managing talent is much more forward-looking around what are you doing to retain the people, develop the people, take advantage of maybe the great skill sets that are out in the marketplace, and pull in some of the key skill sets, and make sure that you are positioned and for growth. And so it's all about talent. And I heard a lot of great commentary in the speakers that were earlier today that is in alignment around the fact that companies need to focus on talent. So that's the framework. So our hypothesis going into the survey was that, given those four main pillars, that the companies that were going to emerge out of this downturn were going to be the ones that had taken a very balanced approach and weren't just stuck on the first two in survival mode around cash and costs. That they were also looking at opportunistically or strategically around growth and managing their talent. And a lot of the survey results support that, but it's still really too early to tell who's going to emerge successful. It's really around how confident do they feel how they're going to be when they come out of this economy. But the three things and there's a ton of other fascinating results, but the three things I want to focus on today as findings and perspectives is first, folks, despite a lot of the things in the media, according to the people that we surveyed, executives of very large companies, lots of visibility, the end is not near. It's just, there may be great signs in some ways, but there are enough uncertainty out there that executives are not really thinking that the end is that near. The second piece around here is, like all great dramas, this storyline is going to play out in three main stages. It's just how long are we going to sit in those different stages? And this was a cross-industry survey, and different industry sectors, automotive's going to play out a lot different than, say, consumer business versus life sciences. And so where companies came into the downturn has an impact for how long they'll stay in these different stages of the downturn, but also what sector they're in will play out, because some sectors will be fundamentally changed from where they came in. And then the third piece is really around setting the course. Because of there's so much uncertainty out there, and a lot of companies have been thrown into very, very reactionary mode, there seems to be a lot of opportunity for those companies that can pull themselves up and really set the course, because there's not a lot of companies that are moving forward in that direction at this stage. So those are the kind of the three main points we want to make. So as Winston Churchill said, now is not the end. It's not even the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning. And so, what this is really trying to get across is the end is not necessarily near. And so I would be very curious before I reveal the survey results, to get your perspectives, and I'll simplify it. So how many folks in the room, by show of hands, think that the downturn, we're going to hit the bottom and start trending up in 2009? Okay. How about in 2010? And then how about 2011? Yeah. And you know what? I love it, Joe. Joe's been instrumental, and Nick as well, in helping compile some of the survey results. It's very consistent with both the survey that we went out and talked to executives around, but also we hosted a number of seminars. We've had webinars, where we've had hundreds of business professionals participate. And despite what you see in a lot of the media, most people think it's going to be 2010. And they wouldn't have thought that, say, 6 months ago. And actually, there's as many people that are really optimistic, think it's going to happen in 2009, as people who think it's 2011 or beyond. But it's in 2010, and each week that passes, I think people continue to push out that horizon. So executives agree. We're at least in this for another year. We've been in it for some industries longer, have been in it for longer than a year, but we've been in it for about a year. We've got another year left. So you would think a lot of the actions that companies have been taking, the short-term driven actions, that only takes you so far through this. We liken it to holding your breath. There are a lot of things that companies are doing that you can only do for so long before it fundamentally has an impact, long-term negative impact on your company, like delaying spend on maintenance of equipment. And there's just a whole host of things that you can only do for so long and expect it to carry you through. So why are the executives and you all thinking that we've got a ways left in this? Well, I think we're in unprecedented times, and it's been proven over and over again. And there's still a lot of things out there that it's uncertain to what degree it's actually those will actually have an impact on us, if they will at all. And the amount of change in regulations and we don't know what kind of impact that's going to have. And so that's put just this very strange dynamic of almost inaction around a lot of companies, not being certain what it's going to look like and how they can most effectively operate moving forward. So again, the end is not near. There's still a lot of things that could have an impact. Now, as only Warren Buffett can say, it's only when the tide goes out that you learn who's been swimming naked. And I love this quote. Over the last, at least 5 years, there's been a lot of companies that have been very overvalued, and all of a sudden, boom, it's gone, right? Everybody's underwear is showing, and so I think coming out of this, we're going to get a better sense of how strong, companies really are. So you've always heard the saying, it's better to be lucky than good. Well, I don't know that plays out. I don't know that that's really true anyway, but I don't know that plays out here either. You just got to know, are you lucky or are you good? Because how you take action should vary depending on whether you've been lucky up to this point or whether you've been good up to this point. Okay, so how well companies will fare in these three different stages and how long they may sit in these three different stages, we got to understand what and remind ourselves what are those kind of three different stages. And we've got some timing up there, and again, this is just like a forecast, it's not going to be right. As soon as you write it down, it's not going to be accurate. But, broad brush strokes, this first phase, we think we're probably mostly through, right? So the piece where people are in this huge cash crunch and having to make some radical changes, and some of those companies that were really poor performers just, falling out. So we think we're primarily past that first phase, and that was pretty dramatic drop. The most interesting thing is really this second phase that we're calling lumpy and bumpy. So you always hear people talk about the V-shaped rebound, or is it going to be a U-shaped? Well, we think it's going to be a lot like, it's going to be lumpy and bumpy, right? And so we just said, and the executives agreed, that the end's not near. So we know it's going to be lumpy and bumpy for a while. So that means what companies should be focusing on are for the long haul, past the short-term things that got you through the survival mode, but dealing with the lumpy and bumpy strategic investments, focusing on ROI, structural change, things that will change people's operating models. And then the third phase is returning to that new normal. It's not normal. It's not going back to the way it was before. It's going to look different. It's anybody's guess, but it's also a great opportunity. I'm very optimistic as well. I mean, there's great opportunity out there. It's going to look different, and so those companies that are on the leading edge and really thoughtful, rather than getting stuck back and being very conservative in kind of the lumpy, bumpy mode, but are really thinking forward, they can set the stage for what that new market looks like. So getting back to the survey results. What are some of the things that companies have said they've been doing? Where have they been focusing their time? And this is kind of more backward looking, for them backward looking. We'll get to the forward looking piece in a moment. So the first set of eye charts up there is along those same four pillars. Preserving actions associated with preserving liquidity, focusing on cost, positioning for growth, and managing talent. The top talks about what have you actively pursued. So what have you been focusing on? And the bottom set of charts is around to what degree have you achieved what you set out to achieve. And so it's interesting that, and not unexpected, that most of what people said they were doing was focusing aggressively, those are the blue bars, on preserving liquidity and cost, and focusing on cost, right? But with, and not as much attention being paid to positioning for growth or managing talent. They self-preservation mode, right? And the kind of really focusing there. And when you look at how whether they achieved it, they actually feel pretty good. They achieved the things that they wanted. Those big green bars, they didn't achieve it faster, or they didn't exceed expectations. So what this says, as we interpret these results, is so in order to have achieved what you set out to, it must have been pretty short-term focused, right? Because you didn't have enough time to really achieve any long-term efforts that you put forth. So people and the fact that they took aggressive action as opposed to radical action means they know there's still stuff out there on the table they could be doing. So they've only done what they've had to do, and it's been primarily short-term focused. So the longer-term structural change, fundamentally changing their business, and focusing on kind of longer-term, how do you make sure that you're positioned when the rebound comes up, it's still, not a lot of focus has been paid there to date. Okay. So how do they feel about that? So we asked, one of the questions was around what's your confidence level around where you stand when things do start to pick back up. 24% said they felt really confident. The rest said even the way we define confident, that they had taken the necessary short-term steps, but they'll deal with the rebound when it comes. Most everyone said they're not feeling that great about that. They've really tackled what they have to in order to be successful moving forward. So the end's not near. They've been focusing on only the things that they have to focus on, and they're not feeling so great about it right now. On the upside, though, they feel like the changes they've made have been things that will stick. They will be somewhat permanent, or they definitely believe they'll be permanent. So they're things they clearly knew that they needed to do. And so those are good things for them to have been focused on. But there's still clearly more that companies can and should be doing. And they know it. Okay, Leonardo da Vinci. He who loves practice without theory is like the sailor who boards ship without a rudder and compass and never knows where he may cast. So if they're not really thinking forward, they're going to end up where they end up. They're not really directing the ship. And so that's where there's tremendous opportunity for companies to that can get ahead of pull themselves up and really be thoughtful about how they're going to move forward and change the market and be leaders in the market. But let's to that end, let's talk about some of the very specific things that these companies have said they've done and they feel has been effective. So we asked them two questions. Of the things that you've done so far, what's been really effective? And what are the things that you'd say, not so effective? Because we want to be able to learn from one another. So this is kind of a list of the things that they talked about that were effective actions that they'd taken to date. And again, they fall in the different categories of, these are the actions that should have help them achieve the objective of preserving liquidity, cost, growth, or talent. So the way these are color-coded here, the ones that are in white, like eliminating discretionary spending, instituting a cash czar, so somebody whose sole focus is just to be the constituent that manages cash, reducing headcount. Those are things that are yes, they can be very effective, and they're quick. So that's what they were looking for. That was quick, effective actions. Some of the others that are in blue, there are a couple of things, and again, this is not an all-extensive list, but a sampling. Some of the other things, but I'd say to a much lesser degree, are things that are longer term, will have short term, but also will have longer term payoff for them. So, if you look at on the short-term pieces around cost, improving raw materials, sourcing strategies, so, talk to, a retailer and they've gone out to their suppliers and they've said, we're going to pay you 30% less. That's it, your raw material. We can't survive with those raw material costs. That's been a very quick, effective action. In the past, suppliers would have balked. But today, if they're sole source in particular, people are accepting radical change like that and letting that happen. So there are a lot of things on a cost and cash standpoint that never in the past would have been acceptable, but they're able to make them happen in the very short term. Reducing travel and non-local hiring. When you get over to the growth and the talent. Has anybody been out to the malls recently, and when you walk in the store, do you notice you have a warm welcome? I mean, it's phenomenal change. And that's because it costs them nothing, and that's the only thing they feel like they have control over right now. First of all, that customer service all comes from the people you hire and how hungry they are to do their job and keep their job, right? So there's a lot of that has an impact. But there's also, you talk to those companies, and if they're spending any kind of time, money, or resources, it's around focusing on customer service and making sure that anybody who walks into that store, they somehow walk out with something or they upsell. And so again, that's short term. It may not have played out as effectively, say, 5 years ago, because maybe people weren't as hungry for jobs and as motivated, but it's had a positive impact. Same thing around advertising and marketing campaigns. That spend that's still going out there, they're trying to get much more targeted and get more return on their investment. And then on the talent side, some of the things that, again, some of the companies have focused on are around increasing communications. I know even within my own firm, there's been such a tremendous focus on, okay, we know people are feeling insecure and it's uncomfortable and things are happening around reductions or whatever, but we got to make sure that the people that are valuable know that they're valuable to us. And again, that costs nothing, but have that personalized, customized attention. Okay? So what are some of the things that they said were ineffective? That's much more interesting, right? So some of the things that they said were ineffective. I thought there was going to just be this brilliant insight and things that, but I was really surprised. I was really surprised by the things they said were ineffective, because these are things that should be effective. These are tried and true best practices. There's just none of those things up there that you would go, well, that shouldn't work anymore because of where we are. They're ineffective because it's one of two things. Either it wasn't executed appropriately. They were trying to do it too fast. They shortcut it. They didn't have enough resources in order to make it happen effectively. They've done it maybe ineffectively. Or the time horizon, right? It wasn't effective because they needed it in 6 months, and something that's hard to do in good times is even harder to do in bad times. And so it can't happen fast enough. So it was really interesting to kind of look at some of the things that companies felt were ineffective. So who thinks instituting cost controls would be ineffective, or rationalize underperforming customers? That's not ineffective. It just may be harder to do, it may be hard to do, and may take too long to do, or in the case of some of the other ones that are italicized on the right, maybe they tried to do something too quickly that they didn't do it appropriately. So price reductions might be a good idea if you're basing it on facts as opposed to kind of gut instinct or tribal knowledge. If you have to do staff reductions, you probably need to change the workload in order for those things to continue that are a priority to get done, still get done well. Okay. Now this, as I thought about how these survey results would look different if we had companies that were headquartered out in some of the emerging countries, this is the one that I think would look most different. And so what this really says, we asked these executives, we said, to what degree do you think the downturn will have an impact on the geographies in which you play, the products and services in which you serve, and the number of customers that you have? Will you be in more geographies, the same or less? Will you have more products, the same or less? Will you have more customers, the same or less? And what this is really, actually it's less, same, more, less, same, more. So what this is really saying that they're going to play in the same geographies, have the same number of products and services, and fewer customers. So the first two you can gauge that could be intent. They intend not to invest there. But they don't intend to have fewer customers. That's more of a reactionary. And that's not a very positive business strategy to say, we're going to play in the same place, have the same customers. I mean, how do you make that work? And I think this kind of goes to where the uncertainty that's out there, and a little bit of, I heard earlier, some of the complacency around companies, around being risk averse and not wanting to maybe move out of this stage of, I just need to hunker down, get through this, hold my breath, and as opposed to being proactive. And so I'd be interested here to some of those folks that are working in more of the emerging markets as to where you think this might actually play out, what the answers from those executives would be. But this is not so reassuring, actually. But being the optimist, huge opportunity for those companies that see this as, hey, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to take that market share. I'm going to go after those customers because they still exist out there, or I'm going to come up with those new, rationalize my products, come up with new products that really makes, or in services that will really play out in kind of the new industry sector. And all this is all dependent on what your perspective is on how long we're going to be in this, the timing. All right, so I think I got a lot of head nods out there. This is not a V, a U, could be a W. We're calling it gradual and fragile. The return is going to be gradual and fragile. And so it's not to say that people need to be, speeding out of the gate, but they need to be thoughtful. This is good news. There's time for those companies that maybe were lucky up to this point. They had an innovation, and they didn't really have the cost structure and operating model to be a high-performing company. They have time to do that, to fix those things, and that's what they should focus on. Or those companies that are really well-run, for them to make those strategic investments so that when the market does pick back up, they're ready. Because innovation takes a while. And you got to spend some time, you got to have the right talent. But again, it has to be deliberate and thoughtful. Gradual and fragile. So what I want to kind of wrap up with is there's all kinds of evidence out there that that it's going, the end is not here. That industry sector by industry sector, this is going to play out differently. So companies really need to think about where they are in those three stages. Are they still in survival mode and trying to make sure that they can pay the bills? Are they in that kind of lumpy and bumpy and just now's where they're going to understand their cost structure? Or can they really be positioning themselves for growth and setting the stage for their sector? So, knowing where they are, plotting their journey, and also having the courage to make those investments, or those structural changes, because the price of inaction is too high at this point. I mean, there are a lot of companies that or executives that they've been successful because they've been safe, and nobody wants to go to the board and explain why they need to make this multi-million-dollar investment because. What if it doesn't pan out? But, now's the time for those people, to have some courage and make either the structural change or the investments in innovation to move forward. So thank you very much for your time and attention, and I would be happy to take some questions. Thanks. Yes. Right. Agreed. Yeah. So I will freely admit I'm not an economist, and so what I can go by is the clients that I speak with and kind of looking at what everybody else is seeing in the media. But I think we're probably into the back end of 2010, 2011 before we really see a recovery. But, yes?
John, one second.
To me, the critical question is a psychological one, and it revolves around risk.
Mm-hmm.
And the attitude of risk aversion against risk-taking. And to me, the issue is, from your survey, at what point, because it didn't exist at the beginning, did we get into a full-blown risk aversion psyche? And at what point, and this is, because you didn't say you're an economist, didn't mean you're a psychologist, at what point will we get to what leads to real entrepreneurial forward thinking, which is risk-taking? Because at the end of the day, that is what has made America great.
Yeah.
And that is what is key, is especially in bureaucracies, they're always risk averse. And so what you've got is the institutional inclination towards risk aversion before the sales and marketing people say, screw that, let's get going and have some new ideas.
Yeah.
So if you could sort of fashion it within that of a risk aversion, risk-taking paradigm and where their minds are, because until they move out of risk aversion, we'll be on that slow boat.
Yeah, agreed. So two things. We did ask a handful of questions around leadership traits that have been effective to date and what they think will be important moving forward. And of course, people answered, everything, right? Focus and courage. And so that was not really conclusive, but it spawned a lot of conversations. And if you think about who controls the purse strings, it's the CFO, right? And so the CFOs that have been put in place over the last 10 years, have been the ones that have been, they've had to respond to, to Sarbanes-Oxley and all of those things. So very risk averse, very kind of by the numbers. They're the ones that are, kind of holding the purse strings, holding everybody, making sure that they hold the companies in line. While they're in growth mode, they're the ones holding back, right? But the role of the CFOs actually needs in downtimes actually has to switch. And so can you change an individual's kind of DNA, right? As to, to move from being kind of risk averse to being more, leading edge. So in the down times, they actually ought to be the ones that are saying, hold on, folks, we can't not make that investment. That's the future of our company. So the company needs to have that natural tension. In the good times, the CFO is holding back. In the bad times, they actually need to be the ones pushing, going, no, this is the right thing to do. And so I suspect, I personally speculate we'll see a lot of leadership changeovers because it's hard for people to make that mental shift. And Dr. Booth, yeah.
I was just going to comment that I think there's a lot of evidence that when companies do, leap forward. I guess you don't want to be like that old story about the guy saying we're standing at the precipice and now it's time to take a great leap forward. But I know after the meltdown in Southeast Asia in 97, 98, a lot of European American companies that were new to the area pulled back. And the ones that stayed, even on a modest basis, really had an advantage a few years later in terms of the networks and the knowledge in their company and the knowledge of their company by the other players. It really pays off. Yeah. We have an initiative here in the College of Business we call USLAT, the U.S. Latin America Trade Program. And we're trying to help companies go in both directions into Latin America from here and vice versa. And we are finding at least some small to medium-sized Latin American companies that have been looking at the U.S. market for a long time. Obviously, it's the big ticket item for them. But they've concluded that now is not the time to pull back, but to go ahead with some of their business planning, their analysis to get positioned for when their product can be rolled out here when the marketplace looks a little better. So I think American firms have to ask the same question going elsewhere. Is this the time to get in on the ground floor?
Right. No, I completely agree. I mean, now's the time to be relatively opportunistic, but deliberate, right? So, I don't think we'll see, we've seen mergers and acquisitions taper off because of the whole, cash element of it. But I don't know that it'll ever fully return. I think you'll see, mostly the acquisitions be much more deliberate as opposed to just trying to turn companies. Be more strategic.
Did you, in the survey, just a question, did you get beyond what I guess we would call the functional analysis? Did any of the questions go to the wider context of the business, of whether the leadership, you were talking to CEOs, I presume, or anyway, corporate leaders, of how they are dealing with all of the contextual things, the wider economy, politics, all these other things that are going on in the global world? It seems the categories that I was hearing are more, the traditional business management ones rather than the larger leadership and strategic ones.
So really didn't get into kind of political or impressions around what was happening in different countries, that sort of thing. No, we didn't. We kept it very focused on their business and how they were responding and preparing for the return.
I don't know whether you had any actual answer, where you could not just answer the survey.
Right.
But one of the issues that we're studying a lot at Georgia State, and many people in companies are focusing on the issue of risk. Obviously, we were exposed to a lot, and maybe more than we realized in terms of American companies anyway. But it has to do risk, as John was talking about, it's about risk aversion, risk taking, but there's a middle ground or a different part of that analysis, which is risk mitigation and even what I call risk exploitation, if you really understand the risk. How are companies in your survey looking at risk? Because risk has two sides. We always think of it as the bad stuff that can happen to you. If you understand how to be resilient or can manage the risk in a positive way, you can even take advantage of that, and it becomes part of your very structure and your strategy going forward. Did any of the executives talk about risk?
You know, the way I'd say we kind of talked about risk was in that we asked in each of the different categories around contingency planning and how they were really looking at, you know, the different scenarios that could play out. And again, I don't recall the numbers off the top of my head, but fewer people were focused on scenario planning that you would expect, given the uncertainty. It was really surprising that you're so uncertain, but that's paralyzed you to action, right? As opposed to, you know, instead of looking at several different scenarios, it seemed much more reactionary. So that's how we kind of talked about it.
Actually, I have one question, Kelly.
Sure.
In your interviews with all these executives, one of the fundamental causes for the financial collapse, you know, on a human side is attributed to the leadership in general. So there's a whole ethics and corporate social responsibilities of companies. Where do you stop the greed kind of really comes into play when you go back and try to dissect what happened. So as part of forward-looking, you know, thinking on what these companies are thinking, what amount of that attention is paid towards that ethics, value system, corporate social responsibility, or are they thinking about, as a survival mode, shortchanging some of those because you just have to go after bottom lines? Yeah. So what's your take, and what were the general thinking in that area?
So it wasn't, again, wasn't a specific question that we asked about how much their company changed from an ethics standpoint. But, you know, I'm trying to think in some of the discussions whether ethics or greed actually came up as a discussion. It wasn't necessarily a focus of the conversation, but, you know, it's a great question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question about young professionals. It's my concern and many of my peers. And I guess growth strategies are not the top priority right now for many companies, but for people like me, young professionals, competing with somebody with baggage of experience, what is the strategy? Those years of experience, school, language skills, what do you see like a competitive advantage for young professionals to succeed coming out of recession?
You know, I think flexibility and breadth of experience. I mean, being very versatile. I mean, my sense is in the past is we've been very focused on this particular degree or this type of experience that fits within this particular job. And you know, as a young professional, what I would say is be flexible and motivated, and don't underestimate the versatility of your prior work experience and how it plays out in different roles.
Hi, Kelly. Just a specific question just on strategy and operations practice in general in this economy.
Sure.
It seems, you walk into executives these days, they're just worried about cost restructuring, at least in your survival mode. I really like the way you laid that out. So you talk about strategy to them, they think, okay, yeah, right, that's just, not my priority right now.
Yeah.
So in the new norm, are there certain industries and sectors that you say have more of a better cash position that lead them naturally to think more in growth terms because they can afford to, as opposed to being in survival mode? Have you any comments on the landscape of what sectors or what type of industries would be more favorable for strategy and operations going forward in the new norm?
Yeah, well, so it's interesting. The two industry sectors within consulting that are doing really well because of all the change are the healthcare and life sciences and federal practices, which makes a lot of sense given the amount of money that has influxed into those, the amount of change, and with change comes the need for advice and counsel and support. And so those are two industry sectors that are already really booming quite a bit. Yeah.
Any more questions? Okay.
All right. Oh. No, please.
Picture. I think it's really important in follow-up to what Anita's question. I don't know whether it was obviously not part of the survey,
yeah,
but in your practice, there are a number of chief executives, some of the most prominent spokespersons for a corporate world. I would name companies like the Coca-Cola Company, General Electric, and Cisco Systems, just to name three,
Yeah.
whose chief executives or chairpersons, either recent or current, are going all over the country talking about connected capitalism, that the future of American enterprise has to do with an integrated, connected strategy that is connected to employees, to communities, to the wider issues, including, of course, to their operational expertise and acumen. What are you hearing about that in this crisis situation? We might have talked about that 2 years ago or a year ago. Now we're however many months and years into the crisis you want to name. What are you hearing from your client base at the strategic executive level about what are we going to do about the notion of connected capitalism as being what at least the three companies, CEOs of those companies I named say is absolutely essential? We will not be successful going forward in the global enterprise if we don't connect in ways we haven't thought about before because of the challenges to the market system.
Yeah, well, I mean, along that lines, I think those types of things are table stakes, right? I think, most, when I think about some of the motivation, and if you think about maybe even managing talent, a lot of that is being driven by maybe market needs, but it's also about how do you make sure that you maintain and manage the great talent that you have. When you look at the workforce, the Gen X and the Gen Yers, that's incredibly important, and they have such a tremendous influence on the actions that are being taken and whether they stay with those companies. A company's position on sustainability, corporate responsibility, and it being integrated within the business decisions, not just the business decisions that, the obvious ones that they make, or the fact that they can do they have very specific programs, but that it's part of their culture. That's really important to retaining some of the best new talent, more so than maybe it is with some of the other generations. So I guess if I think about where I've heard that mostly referred to, it's really around in the managing talent piece, around retention and attraction of the newest talent.
Any other questions? Okay. I have one final question, which is actually not really a question, but I'd just like to hear your comments. It's not so much related to the survey, but if you're talking about in a global context, clearly, you've talked to all these global leaders. Clearly, we want to think beyond America in this crisis, situation, because there seem to be opportunities elsewhere. There seem to be other things happening, which are slightly better than in the part that we live in. So would you have any closing comments or thoughts to kind of talk about how does that play into our current, whether it's our profession or lifestyle or our living in general?
For how people should
yes.
Yeah, no,
from a human standpoint.
It's fascinating to me because I do a tremendous amount of recruiting. I spend probably, I can't even estimate how many hours I spend on recruiting and going out to campuses, and the experiences that the kind of the millennial generation right now have, and getting foreign language experience is, you just do. Please, if you're not doing it, go do it. You get the experience, not just traveling to other countries, but living and experiencing those cultures, working in those, take those opportunities, especially now in your career. It will be invaluable because that's the direction, all businesses are going. And we can no longer just kind of apply the way and expect to stay in the United States and operate in the U.S. for our career. Yeah, I look just within our company. Our CEO has actually said, you know what, my leadership team, there's nobody who will be on that leadership team that hasn't worked globally, because we're a global firm, and so you can't be expected to manage a global firm with just all people that have U.S. experience. So, all right.
That's actually great advice. Definitely applicable to part of the crowd here today. But thank you very much again. I think it's been extremely insightful.
Thanks.